Sure. Starting from the outside, let's come in contact first with fibrous pericardium. That's my number 1. Number 2 is my parietal pericardium. Number 3 is my visceral pericardium. Number 4 is my myocardium. Number 5 is endocardium.
That's inside to out.
That is outside to in, superficial to deep. So if you had, for whatever reason, a needle that pierced the heart, those would be the 5 layers that you would travel through to get to the interior of the heart itself. There are situations where you may have excess fluid build up in this pericardial space, and in that case, it actually acts to squeeze the heart. So excess fluid around the outside of the heart is a really bad thing. And you'll notice on your worksheet the name for this is kind of an oddball. It's cardiac tamponade. I always think tampon, you know. Excess fluid around the outside of the heart, bad thing. Okay, so what they actually can do is insert a syringe into that pericardial space and extract and pull off that excess fluid. And that excess fluid can put a lot of pressure on the heart and actually reduce the amount of blood that can travel through the heart. And that is a problem in and of itself. So, yeah, there may be situations where somebody has excess serous fluid build up in that pericardial space. So we've actually covered the bottom of the page already. We've actually covered the 3 walls of the heart, epicardium, myocardium, and endo. Let's just talk about what those are. We know that the epicardium is this outermost layer here that you're looking at. But keep in mind, the epicardium is actually made of what? Serous membrane, right? So this epicardium is actually the deepest layer of serous membrane. And like I said, that's the confusing factor here because it depends on your perspective. Epicardium is the same as your visceral pericardium, and that in fact is the outermost layer in terms of the 3 heart walls. Come into the middle layer, and that's where you're going to find the myocardium. What type of muscle tissue makes up the myocardium? Cardiac, good. So here we have a thick layer of cardiac tissue. Come into the innermost layer, you'll now come upon your endocardium. Endocardium lines the inside surfaces of the heart. So you'll notice that inside the ventricles and inside the atria, you have an endocardium inside the heart. Okay. 2 words at the bottom of the page for you. Both of them end in itis, so we know that they are inflammations. We have pericarditis and endocarditis. So what do you think pericarditis is an inflammation of? Pericardium, exactly. You might have noticed in this previous picture the close relationship between heart and lungs. And sometimes people may have something like pneumonia, for instance. That pneumonia bacterium or virus can actually irritate the heart lining. And if you irritate the heart lining, you may actually result in pericarditis. If it's a bacterial problem, then we can easily treat that with something like antibiotics, but we have to give it time for it to take effect and then reduce inflammation around the outside of the heart. So things like steroids can also help to reduce that inflammation. But, at the same time, that puts a squeeze on the heart and limits the amount of blood that can travel through. Never mind the pain that you might have from having pericarditis. So that pericardium can, feel like a heart attack if you have excess fluid or if you have a bacterial inflammation there that's causing pericarditis. So that's a real concern for somebody who has inflammation, such as pneumonia, for instance, that travels over and irritates those heart layers. Bacterial infections can also promote endocarditis. What's that an inflammation of? Endocardium, good. And of course we can have problems with those heart valves. 4 of them we have. on the inside of the heart. So they are associated with that endocardium. And again, that's a concern for someone with endocarditis. Now that you've seen those 5 layers and walls of the heart, starting from fibrous pericardium all the way inside to the endocardium, let's take a look at layers A and B here. Notice that A looks thick and tough. What do you think? Fibrous pericardium. What do you think about letter B? It's part of the serous membrane, right? So we probably can't differentiate here whether it's parietal or visceral, but yeah, you're probably looking at the serous pericardium there. What's the alternate name for the visceral pericardium? Epicardium. And where is that layer found? Right, it is the closest of those layers to the heart. It is also, in fact, the outermost wall of the heart. So, like I said, there's 2 perspectives to looking at this.
So it's a layer and a wall.
It's a layer and a wall, but it's the same layer and wall. Yeah, that's the confusing thing.
So we're using wall, we're using epicardium, myocardium. We're using a layer, we're using a visceral. All right.
Exactly, you got it. Yeah. So there's a picture of cardiac tamponade. We talked about that one a moment ago. They also call this one the heart plug, kind of an odd name there, and pericardial effusion. All of that deals with excess fluid around the outside of the heart, and that fluid can be drawn off through needle aspiration. Okay, and you notice in this picture, this is one of our hearts from lab, just how thick that myocardium is. Considering we do have 4 chambers in the heart, where do you think those myocardium layers are the thickest? Inside the ventricles, right? Because those atria tend to have less myocardium, those ventricles definitely have a lot thicker myocardium down there. Just as a reminder, that myocardium is composed of heart muscle or cardiac muscle. Oh boy, this is going back to 210, right? What are some features of cardiac muscle?
Intercalated disc.
Intercalated disc.
Good. Intercalated disc. Gap junctions. Okay, so what we're looking at here, we're looking at branching cells. That's a very important feature. No other type of muscle tissue is branched, because if you want the nerve impulse to travel all to one area of the heart simultaneously, you've got to branch those fibers so the nerve impulse can split and run. Branching is one feature. You'll notice those intercalated discs, there's one up there, are in fact gap junctions. What do gap junctions allow for? Do they stop flow or do they allow flow? They allow flow, yeah. So we're allowing nerve impulses to not have to stop where one class of membrane butts against another. We're letting that message flow directly to the next set of cells. This is also striated, and it does contract by the sliding filament theory of muscle contraction that you heard of back in Bio 210. But there's something interesting about cardiac muscle. It can contract independently of nerve stimulation. Frankenstein, you know, it does its own job in there. So that's something unique to cardiac muscle. It has an ability to contract without outside nerve stimulation. All right, so that's page 36. How about questions on that page? If you want to read a little more about these layers and walls, they are covered on page 582 in your text. We're now going inside because our job is to understand how the heart works as a pump. So starting on page 582, 583, and so on, she'll actually cover for you the 4 major chambers of the heart and talk about how they're, operating with pumping blood. That takes us over to page 37 on your course pack. All right, so the top 2 chambers are called what?
Left and right atria.
Good. You've got 2 atria, or you can call them singular, a right atrium and a left atrium. That is simply another name for a little room or little chamber. These are what we call receiving chambers because their job is to receive blood from flow returning back to the heart. Yeah, they're collecting chambers, exactly. Okay, let's talk about the types of blood that comes back into your right atrium and the blood vessels that deliver that blood there. Coming from the head and arms, we have
Superior vena cava.
good. Superior vena cava, bringing blood back down. Vena cava just means big veins. So we are bringing deoxygenated blood back into the right atrium through the superior vena cava. All they show us in this little model is a blue ring at the bottom, and that illustrates what blood vessel? Inferior vena cava. Where is that bringing blood from?
The stomach and
Legs.
lower part of the body.
Yeah, anywhere below the heart or inferior to the heart returns its blood back into that inferior vena cava. So you're right, you're looking at digestive organs, you're looking at the legs, liver. So this is going to be bringing blood back to the heart as well that's also deoxygenated, just like the superior vena cava. One last one here on the back side of the heart, you'll notice this little blue vein. It is called the coronary sinus, and it's bringing blood back from flow within the heart muscle itself. Keep in mind, the heart is muscle. It also needs oxygenated blood. The deoxygenated blood is returned to this coronary sinus. You might notice this little bloody red hole here in your right atrium. That is for the coronary sinus to open up. So that's 3 places now that is carrying deoxygenated blood back to the right atrium of the heart. SVC, IVC, and now coronary sinus. All 3 of those vessels carry deoxygenated blood. For that reason, they are shown as blue on most models. Like we talked in our last class period, there is no such thing as blue blood. It's just dark red because it's lacking oxygen and it's mostly carrying carbon dioxide. Let's take a look at your left atrium on the left-hand side of the heart. This particular chamber receives blood from where? Lungs. Good. It is oxygenated blood. And if I flip around here to the back, you'll notice that we have 4 pulmonary what?
Arteries.
Arteries, good.
2 left and 2 right.
2 left and 2 right. And they're going to dump blood from the left and the right lungs back into the left atrium of your heart. Like I said, that is oxygenated blood. Here we go with red for those 2, blood vessels here.
Those pulmonary veins.
I was wondering if you were going to catch that.
There you go.
As I was saying that, it didn't sound right.
Well,
Pulmonary.
Pulmonary is right.
Veins.
But veins carry blood back to the heart, right?
Almost got her.
Almost got me. Veins are usually blue. Arteries are normally red, but in the heart there's an exception of 2. Those are your pulmonaries, okay? So here's an oddball thing just to keep in mind. We're going to find a reversal of color in the heart.
And the pulmonary.
There you go. So they're going to dump your oxygenated blood into the left side of the heart. You will notice that we're going to carry oxygenated blood from the left atrium into the left ventricle, deoxygenated from the right atrium into the right ventricle. What this little wall in the middle does here is keep separate deoxygenated blood on the right-hand side from oxygenated blood over here on the left-hand side. So, just something to keep in mind here, this 4-chambered heart actually works fairly well as a pump because we're dealing with keeping the types of blood separated. We're not having to have deoxygenated blood mixed with oxygenated blood, so everything is kept separate that way.